Welcome, everybody. I'm Julie Sanderson, and I'm the event director for the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce. And, for over 125 years, the Chamber has been the region's trusted source of information on issues impacting businesses. And that's no different during these times. And gosh, if I thought a year ago, today I would still be saying these times, who knew? Going to go ahead and put some of these folks on mute here. But over the last year, we have held dozens of informational webinars with experts educating us on PPP and EIDL and how to lead in a crisis, and most recently navigating the COVID-19 vaccine process and how it impacts business. But today we are pleased to have our partners from Bricker and Eckler with us to dive into the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. President Biden's 1.8 trillion, yes, that's T for trillion, American Rescue Plan was signed into law on March 11th. And many Americans have already received their stimmies of $1,400 a person. And those checks are probably the most well-known part of the stimulus package, but the law is nuanced with lesser known provisions, including large sums to be paid to local governments and small businesses with items that directly impact your business and our region. So many, many thanks today to Jeff and Brooke for being with us to share that information. Just a few things before we get started. Please remember to keep yourself on mute to reduce that background noise and interruptions. And as I mentioned, we are recording this webinar. Give us just 24 to 48 hours to have it ready. It'll be on the Chamber's member resources page, but I will send that link out to you all when it's ready. And included in that, for those of you who may ask, the deck that is being shared with us today will also be included on that. So, just wait for that link to come. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that come up during this. Feel free to put those questions in the chat. One thing that we will do is monitor those. We may not stop the presentation right away to get to those. We find a lot of times you're anticipating a question that Brooke or Jeff are going to share after we, further as they go further along. So we'll get to those questions at the end. And just a reminder, and I'm sure Brooke and Jeff will attest to this and share this. This information is available and current as of today, April 20th, 2 o'clock. That's our little timestamp on that. Just so that as you are reviewing it in the future or taking a look at the recording later, just remember that this is changing and evolving, so the information is accurate as of today. But now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Jeff Harris has more than 2 decades of experience in Ohio's economic development. He provides counsel to local economic developers on public finance projects associated with levying special assessments and managing joint economic development districts and new community authorities. Jeff focuses on economic modeling of tax increment financing mechanisms and enterprise zone and CRA real property tax abatements. Prior to joining Bricker, Jeff held various attorney and non-attorney public service roles at the state, county, and city levels, including with the Ohio Department of Development, with the city of Worthington, and with the Area Development Foundation of Knox County. Brooke Mangiarelli is also joining us. Brooke has experience assisting clients with the negotiation and establishment of various economic development programs, including tax, increment financing, community reinvestment area abatement, joint economic development districts, and special assessment financing. She serves a wide range of clients, including political subdivisions, financial institutions, and special purpose districts, including energy special improvement districts. Brooke's practice also focuses on property assessed clean energy financing, which allows property owners to assess innovative financing for energy savings and renewable energy improvements. And with that, I am pleased to turn it over to Brooke and Jeffrey.
Great. Thanks, Julie. And thank you, everybody, for having us today. It's an honor to be presenting to the Toledo Regional Chamber And as Julie went through our bios, again, thanks for doing that, Julie. You'll notice a lot of our client and client focus is with public and local governments. This is a fantastic opportunity, though, for us to speak to businesses. And so what we did is we took our understanding of what we call ARPA, a lot of folks call it the Rescue Plan Act or just Rescue Plan, and try to really hone it down for business interests through today's presentation. So we'll go through that together. And Julie, as I get started, I have had issues with this where once I start to try to advance, it doesn't show up. Did you see an advanced slide just then? No. Okay, so I'm gonna stop share. I'm gonna go right back out again. So if everybody will just bear with me. This has happened. We've done this a couple of times now. Let's see. And do you see a new slide now, Julie? Okay, great. And if I do this, does it go backwards and forwards? Okay, there we go. All right. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to cover basically the first half or so of comments regarding the Rescue Plan Act. And then my colleague Brooke will then cover us through the state and local fiscal recovery fund, which probably has a lot of impact for folks in this call. As we get through this, what I thought it'd be helpful, though, is to start with all the different stimulus packages we've seen. There have been 3 over the last really year, 13 months. And then we're going to deep dive into the rescue plan itself, talk about Ohio's rollout, which you'll notice is a series of question marks. We don't know a lot now. And as we get into this together, you're going to realize that there's quite a bit of this that Brooke and I don't know. And I don't know that it's specific to Brooke and I, as opposed to, there's just not a lot of federal or state regulation guidance out there yet, but it's coming and we can see it coming. And then we'll have time for Q&A, as Julie mentioned, hopefully as folks get engaged in the topic and ask us questions. So let's follow the breadcrumbs. For those of us who've been watching federal stimulus, we know that it really got its start last March with the CARES Act. The CARES Act was really the, from a public knowledge standpoint, it had the PPP program and the first of the several stimulus payments to individuals. We looked at it from the fact that it had a tremendous amount of money for state and local governments. Ohio received $4.5 billion in total allocation under the CARES Act last March for COVID-related expenses between March 1st and December 30th, 2020. Why December 30th and not the 31st? We don't know, but it was a tremendous amount of legal advice we had to give around that date set for a lot of local governments trying to figure out how could they spend their funds and how could they direct those funds to small and larger businesses, such as the folks on this call. There were also the PPP program, like I mentioned, as well as funding to HUD. $150 billion of that CARES Act went directly out from Treasury to governments, including $778 million to 6 cities and counties in Ohio, based on large populations, with the remaining just under $4 billion to the state, of which 1.2 went out to local governments. Some of the folks in this call may have received, either if you're a public entity yourself, or if you're a business that received stimulus assistance from your local government, that's probably where you saw some of your direct connection point to the first of the federal stimulus packages in the CARES Act last March or into the spring, summer. Then at the very end of December, there was another second stimulus package. This had a smaller individual payment amount for taxpayers, but it also extended the CARES Act deadline for eligible expenses all the way through December 31st of 2021. So a lot of local governments were stressing how could they spend their stimulus by December 30th of 2020 and meet all those deadlines and all the regulations. Lo and behold, Congress extended that deadline all the way out another year to December 31st, 2021, so that it reduced some of that stress. I will tell you that Brooke and I spent quite a bit of time with clients helping them understand the December 30th, 2020 deadline, just to see that deadline extended by work of Congress at the end of last year. But even as of last week, we are seeing the last of Ohio's allocation distributed out, or being pushed out rather, where the Ohio General Assembly has 4 packages right now that are due to be approved likely by the Senate and then signed by Governor DeWine in the coming weeks. And for those on this call, probably of most interest would be House Bill 169, which allows up to $125 million. This is all within Ohio for bars, restaurants, and lodging, the tourism industry. So we've got even some last vestiges of the CARES Act coming through as we speak in the past week or so. But you all signed in to hear about the American Rescue Plan Act, and that's really where we are today. So we've got 3 stimulus packages. Now we're on the 3rd one, signed by President Biden on March 11th. As Julie mentioned in her opening remarks, this is a $1.8, $1.9 trillion relief package. There's a lot of money in this for a lot of different people. We will cover several of these elements, but just as an overview, we've got state and local governments receiving quite a bit of funding, school districts, public transit, including TARTA up in the Toledo region, restaurants and bars again. So we just saw that amount of cash, $125 million within the state under Ohio legislation pushing out. Now we've got federal money going out to bars and restaurants. We'll cover that here in a minute. There's additional eligibility for PPP as well as additional money, broadband access, and more money for housing assistance. What do we know about what the funds can be used for? Well, not a lot. The US Treasury is going to be issuing guidance as to how the funds can be used. And where we spent a lot of time, Brooke and I and others together last year on advising folks what Treasury is saying you can use with your CARES Act money, we don't have a lot of guidance yet from US Treasury on what you can use your Rescue Plan Act money for. But we imagine it'll follow the same pattern that we saw with CARES Act, which is about the time Brooke and I and others in this line of work master the latest set of US Treasury guidance, wait a week or two, and they will reissue new guidance, and you'll have to relearn the new stuff, usually with clients calling asking for a couple hours notice of what can they use their money for. Small violin playing in the background, right? But it's something that we do try to pay a lot of attention to. And it's a lot of work to folks like us who figure out how can we get our clients to understand how they can use the money best. There is a new launch pad or rather landing page that's just been launched as of the 15th of April so that any state and local fiscal recovery fund guidance will be posted on that website. There is also last week announced the creation of a new office within US Treasury with direct connection to the White House, in which they will oversee all these breadcrumbs we talked about. So all the money's coming out of the CARES Act, its update in late December, as well as the Rescue Plan Act. All of those will be funneled through, all of the guidance rather, will be funneled through this new Office of Recovery Programs so that US Treasury has one voice on how the monies can be spent. What do we know about Ohio starting to appropriate those funds once received? Remember, we've got about $5.5 billion coming into the state. We don't know yet. That will come through the actual Ohio General Assembly. The House and the Senate here in Ohio will make appropriation language in bills saying this is what the money can be used for, but we don't have anything yet. Similarly, the Governor's Office of Budget and Management here in Ohio is really the fiscal office or the fiscal officer for these federal funds. As of yesterday, they just pushed out a request that Ohio's legislative authority create three new funds. One fund for the $5.5 billion that Ohio will receive in its state fiscal recovery fund. Those are for costs that can be incurred due to COVID through the end of December of 2024. Those payments are to come to Ohio within 60 days of Ohio sending off a certification. And Brooke will talk about that a little bit more as we get further along today. Further, non-entitlement entities. So these are not counties and not large metro cities, but pretty much anything else. So incorporated villages, municipalities, and then Brooke and I also do believe townships are probably going to go into the mix at some point too. More to come on that here in our presentation. But collectively in Ohio, they will receive $815 million. And so the state is creating its own fund to hold those dollars as well. And then finally, there is a capital projects fund that's been created in Ohio. It has been asked to be created as of yesterday to hold up to $274 million in federal funds for capital projects. The Auditor of State has also lent his voice to the arrangement, which, as we saw with CARES Act, some of this is you've got to make sure you're covering a lot of the different guidance points. So U.S. Treasury, Ohio OBM, Ohio Auditor of State, all those entities need to be consulted as we look at how can you spend these monies. And a lot of the questions that may arise today posed to Julie for me and Brooke, you may hear me and Brooke answer back, we don't know, but it depends on what you're going to tell the auditor, especially if you're a local government, when that auditor shows up on premises from the state to review your expenditures. So the Auditor of State is a tremendously powerful voice on this as well. He has issued a bulletin just noting that if you're a local government, you need to put the federal funds from the Rescue Plan Act into separate fund accounts. A lot of inside baseball stuff, probably for our business audience. You may be kind of in food coma after your lunch, but just know that this is where a lot of the action is and where a lot of the nuance of these federal funds usually sits, and why sometimes lawyers like us come back and say, you can't do that, truth be told. So let's get into the actual funding lines. What we do know is Ohio has, I've seen numbers of about a million residents within Ohio's total population of just over 11 million have inadequate broadband service. There is broadband money directly in the Rescue Plan Act. It's for schools and libraries. So for those of you on this call who have an interest in broadband expansion within your home community, in Northwest Ohio, if you've got areas that are underserved or last mile service of broadband is missing, know that there's $7 billion that's been allocated to the FCC to be distributed among schools and libraries to address the homework gap. And we know that at the end of March, the FCC did publish a notice of rulemaking of how they intend to push the monies out. So for those of you who are working on matters involving broadband access or lack thereof, it may be useful to consider your local school district and public library system as a helpful partner in addressing your broadband matters. We've had some questions from clients as to what kind of job training or workforce development is in the rescue plan itself. There's not a lot. There are elements of the rescue plan that deal with workforce training. And when we think about the Toledo region, with Toledo Express, you may have some input or some relevance with your airline jobs. Maybe there's a smattering of aviation manufacturing, but certainly some veterans in the region. That's really the three areas that we found the most pronounced kind of addressing workforce matters within the Rescue Plan Act. We would suggest that as the President Biden pushes out his the jobs plan to be then followed by the family plan, which will come later. These are two additional pieces of legislation. The jobs plan being mostly infrastructure, the family plan being really tied to childcare and other societal challenges. We would expect workforce training to probably focus much more heavily in the jobs plan. This is going to come out this spring or summer, or the family plan that's probably going to come out thereafter. But what we do know today is the rescue plan itself, the one we're all talking about today, does have some airline jobs, aviation, manufacturing jobs, and veterans workforce matters. When we think about chambers, and when I've worked with chambers before, typically restaurants are pretty big audiences or elements of any local chamber. There is revitalization fund funding for restaurants in here. A couple points. I've only got one slide on this, and I know there's a lot of words in this slide. But there's a couple of things I want to bring to your attention. It's $28.6 billion to support restaurants. The list actually is quite broad. Restaurants, food trucks, brew pubs, tap rooms, and bars, including those in airport terminals, with grants of up to $10 million per restaurant or bar operator, or no more than $5 million per location. And you can use the funds for a whole slew of needs. So payroll, mortgage, rent, utilities, food and beverage supplies, operational expenses, including paid sick leave for your employees, Eligible operators, the bar to entry is not high. You have to submit a good faith certification that you need or that the funds are necessary, and you're not otherwise part of the shuttered venue operator grant program. Ineligible would be government-owned operators. But a couple points on this. There's actually reporting out today that the U.S. Treasury is going to run this program out on a 7-day pilot basis, where folks will be invited to submit almost like a mock-up application for 7 days to see how their system works, because we understand the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Fund shut down. The servers were overwhelmed by folks applying for funds a couple weeks ago. So US Treasury is going to run this so that there's a 7-day pilot program for folks invited to participate. And then thereafter, there'll be a 21-day exclusive period for WBE, EDGE, and minority-owned business operators to apply for funds. And then finally, it'll be opened up to everybody. But the advice that we're hearing, and we're not giving legal advice, of course, in this call, but what we're hearing is that the US Treasury is saying that be prepared to submit application on day 1, which also means if you've been following the rollout of these things in the last couple of years, that means be prepared to hit reload, reload, reload for an hour on your computer keyboard as you try to upload your application. So, but if you can get in, there's quite a bit of assistance here in the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. There's also funding through USEDA. This is an area of U.S. Department of Commerce. It typically gets involved in economic development projects. Some of you on this call may have dealt with EDA in the past. Real quick, I'll blow through these slides so we can get other things. But there is an additional $3 billion to the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration to provide to small businesses that are responding to COVID and then the expenses thereof, as well as $750 million of that amount for the tourism industry. So when we think about Northwest Ohio and businesses up on the lake, projects that may make sense, this EDA funding may be an opportunity to address some of the COVID impacts that we're seeing. But who applies? It's really going to be your public entities. So as you're sitting on this call, if you're in the tourism industry or for really in any industry that would want to partner with your local government or kind of public entities in the area, think about joining with them on an EDA application if you have a specific project need specifically related to COVID impacts and dealing with them. You can work with townships, counties, cities, higher education institutions, and so forth. Funds can be used for both planning, the strategy grant there at the bottom, or construction and other tangible items under implementation grants. They're looking at really public works, including broadband. So here's another opportunity to address broadband if you have it, roads, sewer, those kind of things that typically revolve around economic development projects involving local governments. But what we don't know is EDA received $1.5 billion under the CARES Act, and EDA, U.S. Department of Commerce, pushed that $1.5 billion out among its regional offices. And here in Ohio, we're served by the Chicago Regional Office, which received $225 million last year under the CARES Act. But that had to be distributed among all those states. Really, it's the Big Ten states, right, or the MAC states. And as you would imagine, across those number of states, the money dried up very, very quickly. We had heard that pretty early in the CARES Act process, EDA had run out of money. So we may see the same type of thing here. Just be aware, and if you have an interest or a project on the shelf ready to rock and roll, it may behoove you to speak with your county or your municipal economic development office and see if maybe or maybe not EDA funding may be an opportunity for you under this Rescue Plan Act. Higher education, you know, sometimes I've dealt with chambers in my past that do have folks from higher ed on it, sometimes not. But I just want to make sure that with UT and BGSU and a number of other institutions, Findlay and others in the region, we want to make sure that you knew that there's $39.5 billion through fiscal year 23 that's available for all institutions of higher ed, not just state colleges and so forth. Half of that money must go to financial aid for students, the other half to defray lost revenue and costs resulting from declined enrollment as students were remote learning for the past year or so. As well as for those state-supported educational institutions, there's a maintenance of effort requirement where, as we see, states have typically been dropping their total assistance to local, rather to higher education over the last 2 or 3 decades. The federal government now says if you want these Rescue Plan Act funds, you have to maintain a same level of funding for your state education institutions, higher ed, as you did for a period of 3 years before COVID hit. For a chamber audience, there may be interest in this program. The SSBCI, I'll go back, that's a long acronym. The State Small Business Credit Initiative has been commenced or reinitiated with the Rescue Plan Act. It originally ran from 2010 through 2017. And here in Ohio, the Ohio Development Services Agency ran 3 programs: Ohio Capital Access Program, the Small Business Collateral Enhancement Program, and the Targeted Investment Program that allocated out $55.1 million in capital to small businesses here in Ohio. Some of you on this call may have taken advantage of this or maybe helped push out some of these funds. Know that the program really sunset back in 2017, but lo and behold, the Rescue Plan Act is pushing another $10 billion out through fiscal year 2030 to similarly support small businesses with a $1.5 billion carved out of that 10 for socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, or at least businesses that are owned by such folks. There's also another $500 million carve out for very small businesses, and these are businesses with less than 10 employees or sole proprietors and contractors. And so when I think about a chamber audience and who we were speaking with today, I imagine this may be of interest to some of you on the call, others perhaps not. But just know that the Ohio, go back one slide, the Ohio Capital Access Program, Small Business Collateral Enhancement Program, and Targeted Investment Program have been re-upped, if you will, with new federal funding to those programs here in Ohio. I have a few comments on medical health insurance. When we think about a chamber audience, you're going to be employers. You probably have some costs and you're wondering, or you've heard rumors under the Rescue Plan Act. I am not a health insurance or a sick leave attorney by any stretch, but I at least want to make you aware of some items that's within the Rescue Plan Act. First, there is on COBRA, the bill subsidizes 100% of COBRA premiums for employees that are separating from service for up to 6 months, who either lost employment or had reduced hours. And that's going to be allowing for folks who even decline COBRA initially upon separation. The way it works is it's a subsidy to the employee. It does not count against that employee's gross income. And I was on a call yesterday where I had heard employers asking, well, wait a second, do we have to cover that? It's actually, the federal government is having employers cover it, but then it's reimbursed through a tax credit. So for those that are on self-insured plans, that COBRA premium for the 6-month premium subsidy for employees or separated employees will be reimbursed to those employers through a payroll tax credit. For those that are fully insured, the credit's actually claimed by the insurer. And also there's a little piece in there about the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as folks call it. It is extending eligibility for up to 1 year for those who are on unemployment during 2021. And it also enhances the folks who qualify for the subsidies up to 133% of federal poverty level. There's some elements of sick leave in here that I want to just cover real quick before we move on to other things. In the CARES Act, or rather not CARES Act, but still concurrent back in March 2020 to the CARES Act, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, another mouthful of an acronym. It had 2 important things that are maybe of relevance for this chamber audience, and that is the emergency paid sick leave and the emergency paid family leave. Back in March 2020, on the sick leave side, folks or employees could take up to 2 weeks or 80 hours if they were unable to telework due to one of six or one or more of six health reasons, which have now been, and I'll show you here in a second, if they've now been expanded by 3 additional criteria. Similarly, emergency paid family leave was available to employees for up to 12 weeks if they were unable to work remotely due to childcare issues or school closures. First 2 weeks of that being unpaid. What we now know under the Rescue Plan Act is tax credits are now are extended for employers rather who do a number of things that are voluntary. So it's interesting on the Rescue Plan Act, if a employer voluntarily extends that sick leave, they can continue to receive a tax credit, although the tax credit changes from Social Security to Medicare as far as where that tax credit resides for year-end reporting purposes. And those who did receive sick leave, they can still make use of another time window here under the Rescue Plan Act during 2021. But if you make it available to your employees as an employer voluntarily under the Rescue Plan Act, you can't choose which employees can take it. It has to be open to all. So that's an important concept there. And continuing on with this a little bit more, the emergency paid family leave eliminates the requirement that the first 2 weeks are unpaid. Rather, they can receive full payment for a total of 14 weeks under the emergency paid family leave policy. Under the emergency paid sick leave, remember there were, in March 2020, there were 6 reasons for which you could qualify for the sick leave and the tax credit available to employers. It's now been expanded by another 3 criteria, including COVID vaccine, recovering from the vaccine, or seeking and awaiting test results on COVID-19. I'll turn it over to Brooke for the other large element of the Rescue Plan Act, and that is the state and local fiscal recovery fund. So Brooke, would you like to take it from here?
Sure, thanks, Jeff. So right off the bat, under the Rescue Plan Act, we're seeing a much broader range of uses of funds than we did with the CARES Act. With the CARES Act, it was really for using these funds for things that were necessary due to COVID-19. Here, these funds are intended to offset revenue losses, bolster economic recovery, and provide premium pay for essential workers. So Title IX, Subtitle M, Section 9901 of the Rescue Plan Act is an add-on, to the CARES Act, Section 601. So Section 602 appropriates $219.8 billion through December 31st, 2024 to states, DC territories, and tribal governments. That provides for a total of $195.3 billion in amounts payable to each of the 50 states and DC. There's going to be a $500 million minimum to each of the 50 states and DC. And then additional remaining funds will be distributed based on the funds available and states' unemployment rates. Now, there's also a minimum amount. So the total that states are going to get from state local fiscal recovery funds and also the local government funds is going to be at least equal to what the states received from the CARES Act. So for example, Ohio is going to receive at least $4.5 billion. But I believe at this point, per the Auditor of State's recent guidance, it mentioned the state of Ohio receiving at least $5.5 billion from the state fiscal recovery funds alone. Just a note on timing, these amounts are payable within 60 days of a state certification of need. The Treasury does have the ability to withhold up to 50% of these amounts for up to 12 months and then require a second certification of need. We don't know if that will actually happen in practice, but they have the ability to do so. All right, so eligible uses of funds. What can these be used for? These state fiscal recovery funds can only be used for costs incurred during the covered period, which is March 3rd, 2021 onward, Let
me jump in real quick. Before we get started down that road. This is a reference to the emergency responder.
So going back to the eligible uses of funds, the state fiscal recovery funds are only going to be able to be used for costs that respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. These include assistance to households, small businesses and nonprofits, and certain industry sectors. They can be used to respond to workers performing essential work, including providing premium pay up to $13 an hour for employees and grants for eligible employers. They can be used to provide services, government services to the extent of reduction in revenue, compared essentially to the most full revenue of the fiscal year prior to COVID. And lastly, these funds can be used to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure.
Before you move on to the next slide, Brooke, where you had to step in there a minute, I thought it was just me, but I've heard from a few folks, we didn't have your audio on that. So whatever it was that you were saying, we missed that little bit.
Oh, okay. Jeff, could you go back?
Yeah, Brooke. So if I go back, Julie would have been right about here.
Yeah, it's where you broke in to add some additional information to what Brooke was saying.
Oh, no, that wasn't me. I think that was just an audience member. So that may have, yeah.
Okay.
But is this about where we left it, Brooke?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, do we hear this portion or do we want to?
If you could share that again, I think I'm not the only one who lost the audio at that time.
Yeah, definitely. So the Rescue Plan Act includes an add-on to the CARES Act, Section 601. So Section 602 appropriates $219.8 billion through December 31st, 2024 to states, DC, territories, and tribal governments. The amounts payable to each of the states in DC totals $195.3 billion. That includes a $500 minimum amount to each of the 50 states in DC. And then the remaining funds will be distributed based on funds available and states' unemployment rates. There's also another minimum amount, which is going to be the state fiscal recovery fund amount plus the local fiscal recovery fund amount for each state is going to be equal to what the state received under the CARES Act. For Ohio, that means at least $4.5 billion. However, I believe per the Auditor of State's recent guidance, Ohio is expected to receive at least $5.5 billion just from the state fiscal recovery fund alone. Just a note on timing, these amounts are going to be payable within 60 days of each state's certification of need. And the Treasury does have the ability to withhold up to 50% of those funds for up to 12 months and require a second certification of need. We don't know if that will actually be the case, but they do have the ability to do so. So what can these funds be used for? Again, we're seeing a much broader range of buckets than we saw under the CARES Act. The state fiscal recovery funds can only be used for costs incurred during the covered period, which here is March 3rd, 2021 forward, that either respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. These are going to include things like assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits in certain industry sectors. They can be used to respond to workers performing essential work, including by providing premium pay up to $13 an hour for workers and providing grants to eligible employers. They can be used to provide government services to the extent of a state's reduction in revenue, determined compared to the most recent revenue fiscal year prior to COVID. And finally, they can be used to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. So as Jeff mentioned earlier, in the absence of Treasury guidance, we don't know specifically what these funds can and cannot be used for within those broad buckets we just described. However, we do know that there are two specific restrictions as of now on the uses of these funds. The first is that they cannot be used for pension funds. The second is that they cannot be used to directly or indirectly offset tax cuts or credits that result from certain changes in a state's tax law or policy. So on March 17th, 2021, the Ohio Attorney General filed a motion for preliminary injunction to prohibit this section of the Rescue Plan Act from being enforceable. It's the Attorney General's position that that provision is coercive and exceeds congressional authority under the Constitution. And that litigation is pending, so we will see what comes of it.
And Brooke, I may chime in here. So we, as of yesterday, we had some comments from some of our Northwest Ohio client base asking if their enterprise zone, CRA, and other tax abatements would be at risk with this Federal Recovery Act, because the Attorney General, Yost, put an opinion piece out, I think yesterday, if not the day before, arguing that very thing. He actually, in a Yahoo News article I read, he's making the argument that enterprise zones and other tax abatements would be run afoul of the Rescue Plan Act. I just wanted to make a comment here that clearly we're not the Attorney General, but we don't view the Rescue Plan Act as going as deep as into these tax cut prohibitions to impact folks who may have an enterprise zone or a CRA abatement. So I just want to make that general comment. Of course, I'm not offering legal advice here. Please, no one run out and file a legal brief on that comment, but just know that to Brooke's comment, you've even got Attorney General Yost arguing the last few days in Yahoo and other social media sites that these tax abatements could be at risk. We don't see it that way, but more to come. Thanks, Brooke.
Yeah, thank you. And one more note on this too. The limited Treasury guidance that we have received so far has clarified that changes in state tax policy to match recent changes in federal income tax law will not be subject to this mandate, regardless of the effect on a state's net tax revenue. So moving on to Section 603, the Rescue Plan Act appropriates $130.2 billion through December 31st, 2024 to metropolitan cities, non-entitlement communities, and counties. And these are the local fiscal recovery funds. So that includes about $45.57 billion payable to metropolitan cities and about $19.53 billion payable to non-entitlement units of local government via the payments to states within 30 days of states' receipt. Those amounts payable to non-entitlement units of local government are going to be capped at 75% of their most recent budget as of January 27th, 2020. And Jeff and I always joke at this point of the presentation, this is when we start losing folks, because we provided these hyperlinks so you could see your local government's estimated allocations, and they do work. So if you're interested in those allocations, you can check out these resources, and they have some pretty good estimates. So continuing with the local fiscal recovery funds, those allocations include about $65.1 billion to counties. The National Association of Counties also has an estimated amount resource that is hyperlinked here. One note on timing for these funds, I believe 50% of each county's amount is payable within 60 days of enactment of the CARES Act. And then that second 50% is going to be payable no earlier than 12 months after the first tranche is paid.
And Brooke, I may chime in here. When we're looking at these funds, these numbers are significant. So when you think about your metro cities like City of Toledo and others, or Lucas County, Wood County, and others, you're talking tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions on the city and the large urban county side, that we're seeing some jaws drop, if you will, as we speak with clients about the amount of money that they could see coming. And again, the estimates are in the links that Brooke has here provided. Thanks, Brooke.
So these local fiscal recovery funds are going to be able to be used for the same purposes as the state fiscal recovery funds. Again, those are going to be, uses that respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency, respond to workers performing essential work, uses that provide government services to the extent of reduction in revenue, and to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. So lastly, Section 604 appropriates $10 billion to states, DC territories, and tribal governments to carry out critical capital projects, which we thought was really interesting here. There's going to be a $100 minimum amount payable to each state, and those amounts are going to be available until expended. And these are specifically to be used for critical capital projects that directly enable work, education, and health monitoring, which include remote options in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we actually, when we did another version of this presentation, we had an audience member note that it was estimated that Ohio was going to receive, I think, $274 million for the capital projects fund, which is great.
That's right. And then I saw in the Ohio OBM's request to State Controlling Board yesterday, they did cite that same number. So that's a good number. I think we've heard it now from two different sources, 274 million for capital projects, as Brooke noted, around remote work, remote learning. So this could be yet another broadband expansion opportunity for folks who may want to see broadband expansion in Northwest Ohio. Okay, Brooke, thank you. Julie, we are ready if you want to hit us with a number of questions and so forth.
Yeah, sure. There was one question that came into everybody. Are we recording this? And the answer to that is yes. And so when the link is ready for viewing, I'll go ahead and send everybody who registered, because I have your emails, the link to that. But I did get one question directly to me, and it goes back to the sick leave portion of the presentation, asking if the 3 new categories that apply to the sick leave also apply to the FMLA for COVID?
That is a great question. And of course, that's the one area that we have an in-house expert at Bricker that I worked with on these slides. And that's the one, if you ask me and Brooke, State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, we hit it out of the park. On that one, I actually have to say, I don't know, but what we could do, Julie, is ask and then send you an email with the answer. How does that sound?
That sounds good. And then I will send that to who I got this question from. So,
yeah, real good.
So that is actually, and I always say this is a testament to a great presentation. That's the only question that came in specifically as a direct message to me or to the group. So Jeff or Brooke, I don't know if something came in specifically direct message to you, or if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to go ahead and ask those now.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And you're very kind. Sometimes I say, well, either folks maybe are in a food coma or they are so enthralled that, but no, you're very kind. Thank you. And a comment as we wait to see if there are any additional questions. Folks who in the region, they may have run into Jackie. Jackie is part of our team as well on this very effort. She couldn't join us today, but she's an active Rescue Plan Act person. And just know that we're all happy to take any questions here or even after the fact.
Yep. Yep. If you know, I often find that, you know, somebody hangs up, we get off the call and they're having a conversation with a colleague and they're like, oh, I didn't think to ask that. Send that question to me and I will make sure that we get that to Jeff, Brooke, and Jackie and get that answered back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. You know, in a pre-COVID world, I would always gauge how well a presentation went if you had folks lining, waiting to ask individual questions after the presentation. So understandable. Folks want to send any of us an email, happy to take them. Julie, happy to take your emails as well.
Absolutely. You know what? It looks like one did just come in.
Right.
So anything new with the ERTC?
ERTC. I actually, I'm gonna plead ignorance on that. Brooke, have you run into the ERTC?
I have not.
The person who asked that might have a follow-up or employee retention tax credit.
Okay. I am not going to do the thing that I joke with Brooke about lending advice on air in the moment. So I do have an ERTC. I have a real quick blurb. This is terrible. I'll read it to you, but this may help. The bill extends and expands ERTC through December 31st, 2021. It was originally enacted in the CARES Act, which we covered today. The CARES Act being the first stimulus package, allows distressed businesses to claim the credit for a greater share of employee wages. So just know, I think maybe to the caller's question, it's been extended at least through December 31st, 2021. I hope that's helpful. If there is additional ERTC question, please feel free to ask Julie or us directly, and we can get you a quick answer, a better answer than what I just gave here on the line.
All right, people are starting to think. So, and they've been pondering the presentation. Has there been any guidance for the ARPA about whether the COBRA subsidy must be offered to people who were fired for cause during the covered dates?
That's a great question. I don't know, but you know what, boy, hopefully we're going to get one that we can answer, because what I can do is same thing, Julie. I will ask our COBRA expert who helped me with these slides. I'll ask her that. So the employee separation being non-voluntary, right? How does that handled? Is that a fair way to say that? Yeah.
So you got it. Sounds great.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. Julie, we will get you that answer as well. And then if you want to send it out to your caller.
Yep. You know what? And I will send it out to the person who asked, but these follow-up questions, I will also include where I include the link, because somebody may also be thinking that same question. So, so those short answers to those, I will include when I send out the link to the recording.
Excellent.
All right.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for your time. I appreciate all the information that you shared today. I am a small business owner. I own a couple of gyms in Ohio, and I didn't see anything specifically to the fitness field in the presentation today. But, you know, I might have overlooked something of how something might apply to those businesses. Do you see any practical application that I could pursue?
Great, and thank you for your question. Brooke, I didn't see anything specific to fitness centers or gyms. Did you, before we go further?
No, I did not.
Yeah, so what I'd suggest to you, sir, is that I'm going to go back a slide or two if you all indulge me here. If we go back to, well, really right here. So when we think about units of local government, so these are counties, cities, and we also believe townships. So wherever your gyms are located, what I'd suggest is if you look under item A here, what are allowable uses of expenses, they can be in small business support, including nonprofits. So what you may want to do is communicate with your local city, county, and say, you know, hey, I've got a gym in your area. Likely with the quarantine, those gyms were closed for a period of time. If you had not already received assistance from them, you may want to say, are you going to run another or a Rescue Plan Act small business grant program that could help me? That may be the most direct way with our understanding of the ARPA or the Rescue Plan Act, because I didn't see anything specific to gyms and fitness centers.
Okay. Awesome. I will do that. Thank you so much for the guidance.
Our pleasure. Thank you for asking.
Another COBRA subsidy question that we may include with the responses, but just so that you have it, is the COBRA subsidy available for a spouse of an employee who retired pre-COVID?
That is another great question that we will get a fantastic answer back to you, Julie. Okay.
I'll be happy to share with everybody.
Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well,
Julie, I think we received one more question a little bit earlier, which was about when the final rules are set to come out for the use of state fiscal recovery funds and local, well, this one is specifically, sorry, local fiscal recovery funds. Mm-hmm. In the near future, I believe was the wording that we recently received from the Treasury. So sorry that it's not more specific, but that's all we've got to work with at this point. So stay tuned.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a quote, right, Brooke?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, so stay tuned, right?
All right. Well, Brooke and Jeff, thank you so much for this excellent information and for your time this afternoon, and for everybody who attended. We appreciate that as well. Again, we are recording, and so I'll get that link out to everybody. It usually 24 to 48 hours to get that all formatted and ready to go, and we'll have the answers to these questions that came in at that same time. So everybody have a great afternoon, and again, thanks for joining us, and continue to pay attention to that weekly email that you are getting from the chamber to hear about more presentations like this. If you're not getting that, email me so we can figure out why, and we'll make sure that you're all set up. So again, thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.